morning sun cast long shadows across the crystalline arena as representatives from 47 different species gathered for what many considered the most brutal endurance challenge in known space. The Galactic Endurance Council had designed this trial to push beings to their absolute limits, testing not just physical stamina but mental fortitude and species-specific survival adaptations. Commander Zephyr of the Eltarian Empire stood at the observation deck, her forearms crossed as she surveyed the competitors below. Her species had dominated endurance trials for 3 consecutive cycles, their dual heart system and enhanced lung capacity giving them what seemed like an insurmountable advantage. The reptilian Saros had placed second consistently, their cold-blooded efficiency allowing them to conserve energy like living batteries. Among the crowd of alien competitors, one figure stood out not for impressive physical attributes, but for their complete ordinariness. The human representative, Marcus Chen, appeared almost comically underprepared compared to the others. While the Garoth competitor stood 12 feet tall with muscles that could crush titanium, and the aquatic Trill possessed gills that could extract oxygen from any liquid, Marcus looked like he had just finished a morning jog in Central Park. The human delegation must be joking, sneered Vorthak, the lead Saros representative, his scaled hide glistening under the arena lights. Their species only recently achieved interstellar travel. They lack any notable physical advantages. No extra hearts, no specialized respiratory systems, no enhanced cellular efficiency. The arena itself was a marvel of engineering designed to test every possible aspect of endurance. The first zone simulated the crushing gravity of a neutron star's surface, where competitors would need to carry weighted objects across a mile-long obstacle course. The second zone recreated the thin atmosphere of high-altitude worlds, where oxygen levels dropped to barely survivable levels. The third zone was a desert environment with temperatures exceeding what most species considered lethal, while the fourth and final zone combined all previous challenges with the added complexity of a shifting maze that would test navigation skills under extreme duress. Marcus completed his stretching routine, seemingly oblivious to the stares and whispered comments from other competitors. He had packed light compared to others, no specialized breathing apparatus, no gravity assistance suits, no temperature regulation gear. His preparation consisted of drinking water, eating what appeared to be a simple energy bar, and adjusting his running shoes. The opening ceremony began with the traditional recitation of endurance records. The current galaxy record was held by a Zentorian warrior who had completed the course in 47 hours and 12 minutes, pushing through conditions that had hospitalized competitors from lesser species. Most participants expected to finish somewhere between 55 and 70 hours, if they finished at all. The dropout rate historically hovered around 60%. As the ceremonial horn sounded, signaling the beginning of the trial, Marcus simply started walking toward the first zone. Not running, not charging forward like many of his competitors, just walking at a steady, measured pace. The Eltarian commander Zephyr noted this unusual approach with interest. In her experience, species that started conservatively either possessed incredible hidden reserves or were about to embarrass themselves spectacularly. The first casualties occurred within the initial hour as several competitors underestimated the gravitational intensity of Zone 1. The atmosphere was thick with the sounds of labored breathing, mechanical assistance devices whirring, and the occasional thud of someone collapsing under the increased weight. Marcus maintained his steady pace, occasionally stepping around fallen competitors, offering brief words of encouragement that most couldn't understand due to translation delays. What struck observers as most unusual was Marcus's complete lack of reaction to the environmental stresses. While other competitors showed visible signs of strain, the Eltarians' breathing becoming more rapid, the Saros beginning to overheat despite their cold-blooded nature, the aquatic species requiring frequent hydration stops, the human continued his methodical progress as if he were taking a casual hike through a park. Dr. Zenith, the chief medical observer for the trial, began documenting unusual readings from the human's biometric monitors. While other species showed predictable stress responses, elevated heart rates, increased cortisol production, cellular strain indicators, Marcus's readings remained remarkably stable. His heart rate had increased only moderately, his breathing remained steady, and his core temperature showed minimal fluctuation. The human's apparent ease in conditions that were proving challenging for species specifically adapted for endurance began drawing attention from betting syndicates throughout the galaxy. Initial odds had placed Marcus at several thousand to one against completing the trial, let alone placing competitively. Those odds began shifting as observers realized they might be witnessing something unprecedented in galactic endurance sports. By the 8th hour, the field had already been reduced by nearly 30%. The transition to Zone 2 proved devastating for competitors who had exhausted themselves fighting the increased gravity. The thin atmosphere simulation hit like a wall of suffocation, causing immediate respiratory distress for species unprepared for the rapid environmental shift. Marcus entered Zone 2 without pause, maintaining the same unhurried pace that had carried him through the gravitational gauntlet. Where others required supplemental oxygen or had to stop frequently to regulate their breathing, the human seemed to adapt automatically. His chest rose and fell with the same steady rhythm that had persisted since the trial began. Commander Zephyr found herself studying the human more intently. Her own species was struggling now, their dual heart advantage becoming less pronounced as the oxygen-thin environment stressed their enhanced cardiovascular systems. The efficiency that normally gave Altarians their edge was working against them as their bodies demanded more fuel than the atmosphere could provide. "Impossible," muttered Dr. Zenith as she reviewed the latest biometric data. The human's oxygen saturation levels were dropping, as expected, but his body was compensating with an efficiency that defied explanation. His breathing had deepened slightly, but his pace never wavered. Other species were implementing emergency protocols, activating backup respiratory systems, or relying on technological assistance, but Marcus continued as if the environmental change was merely an inconvenience. The Saros delegation was experiencing their first major setback. Their cold-blooded physiology, so advantageous in the desert zones, was proving problematic in the thin atmosphere. Their metabolic processes, optimized for energy conservation, couldn't adapt quickly enough to extract sufficient oxygen from the depleted air. Several Saros competitors had already withdrawn from the trial. Meanwhile, the massive growth representative who had appeared so formidable at the start was now struggling with every step. His enhanced muscle mass, which should have been an advantage, was demanding oxygen his lungs couldn't provide. The irony wasn't lost on spectators that the smallest, most ordinary-looking competitor was outperforming beings who possessed obvious physical advantages. Marcus reached the halfway point of Zone 2 while many competitors were still struggling through the first quarter. He paused briefly, not to rest, but to help a fallen Tentari competitor reach the medical extraction point. The brief delay caused some observers to predict this would be the moment his steady pace finally faltered, that helping others would cost him the energy reserves he needed to continue. Instead, Marcus resumed his progression as if the brief detour had recharged rather than depleted him. Sports analysts throughout the galaxy scrambled to understand what they were witnessing. The human's heart rate had actually decreased slightly during his humanitarian pause, suggesting that his cardiovascular system was operating with an efficiency that shouldn't be possible for a species with no specialized endurance adaptations. The psychological impact on other competitors was becoming evident. Species that had trained for cycles specifically for this trial were watching a seemingly unprepared human maintain a pace that would have been impressive under normal atmospheric conditions, let alone in the brutal environment of Zone 2. Some began pushing themselves harder, trying to match the human's pace, only to exhaust themselves more rapidly. As the trial moved into its 12th hour, Marcus transitioned into Zone 3. The desert environment brought immediate relief to some species while devastating others completely. The Saros contingent, finally, in their element, began to recover some of their earlier confidence. The heat that sent aquatic species scrambling for cooling stations seemed to energize the reptilian competitors. But, again, the human adaptation proved remarkable. Where the desert should have been a significant challenge for a species from a moderate climate world, Marcus seemed to take the temperature increase in stride. His pale skin, which should have been vulnerable to the intense heat, showed no signs of burning or heat stress. He wasn't sweating excessively like many warm-blooded species, nor was he seeking shade like those struggling with thermal regulation. Dr. Zenith called an emergency consultation with xenobiologists throughout the observation deck. The human's performance was rewriting everything they thought they understood about species' capabilities. His cellular efficiency was proving superior to beings specifically evolved for endurance activities. His thermal regulation was matching species from desert worlds. His oxygen utilization was exceeding beings with enhanced respiratory systems. "We need to consider the possibility," Dr. Zenith announced to her colleagues, that we've fundamentally misunderstood human physiology. Their homeworld isn't specialized for any particular extreme environment, but perhaps that very generalization has created a species uniquely adapted for everything. The revelation that a generalist species might outperform specialists in their own specialized environments sent shockwaves through the galactic scientific community. Betting houses suspended wagering on the trial as odds calculators couldn't process the unprecedented data they were receiving. As night fell over the arena, Marcus continued his steady march through the desert zone, now completely alone in his section of the course. Other competitors were either hours behind, seeking medical attention, or had withdrawn entirely. The human silhouette against the artificial sunset looked almost mythical as he approached the entrance to the final zone, showing no signs that 20 hours of extreme endurance challenges had affected him in any measurable way. Zone 4 presented the ultimate test of endurance and mental fortitude. The combination of all previous environmental stresses with a constantly shifting maze designed to break both body and mind had claimed more competitors than any other section in the trial's history. The walls moved according to a pattern that took most species several hours to decode, assuming they maintained the mental clarity necessary for complex problem solving while under extreme physical duress. Marcus entered the final zone at the 22-hour mark, still maintaining the same steady pace that had carried him through every previous challenge. The maze entrance sealed behind him with a pneumatic hiss that had signaled doom for countless competitors over the years. Inside, the environment was a hellish combination of crushing gravity, thin atmosphere, and desert heat, with the added psychological pressure of walls that shifted every few minutes according to an algorithm designed to maximize disorientation. Commander Zephyr had abandoned her observation post and moved to the maze monitoring station, where she could track competitor movements through the complex. Of the original 47 participants, only 12 remained active in the trial. The human was not only still competing but had built what appeared to be an insurmountable lead over the second-place finisher, a Centaurian warrior who was still struggling through Zone 3. The maze itself was a three-dimensional puzzle spanning over 5 miles of shifting corridors, vertical climbs, and technical challenges that required both physical capability and cognitive function. Most species experienced significant mental degradation after prolonged exposure to the harsh environmental conditions, making navigation increasingly difficult as exhaustion set in. The combination of physical and mental stress was designed to reveal the absolute limits of any species' endurance capabilities. Marcus approached the maze with the same methodical precision he had shown throughout the trial. While other competitors had needed to stop and study the patterns, creating complex mental maps and calculation systems, the human seemed to navigate by instinct. His route choices appeared almost casual, as if he were walking through familiar territory rather than a sadistic puzzle designed to break minds. Dr. Zenith monitored his progress through brain activity scanners, expecting to see the typical signs of cognitive overload that affected all competitors in Zone 4. Instead, the human's neural patterns showed remarkable stability. His problem-solving functions remained active without the stress responses that typically accompanied such challenges. His spatial reasoning abilities seemed to improve rather than degrade as the trial continued. "He's not solving the maze," Dr. Zenith announced to her fellow observers. "He's reading it. Somehow, he's intuiting the pattern shifts before they happen." The revelation sparked intense debate among the scientific observers. The maze's algorithm was classified technology, known only to the designers and the trial administrators. No species had ever demonstrated the ability to predict the pattern shifts without extensive study and calculation. Yet the human was moving through the maze as if he possessed precognitive abilities. As Marcus progressed deeper into Zone 4, his advantage over pursuing competitors continued to expand. The Centaurian warrior, finally, entering the maze 6 hours behind, was immediately disoriented by the shifting walls and had to stop frequently to reassess his position. Other competitors were even further behind, with several having activated emergency beacons to signal withdrawal from the trial. The human's physiological readings remained remarkably stable even as he approached the 30-hour mark. Where other species showed progressive deterioration in cellular function, hormone regulation, and cognitive performance, Marcus appeared to have reached some kind of sustainable equilibrium with the extreme conditions. His body had adapted to the challenges rather than simply enduring them. Sports commentators throughout the galaxy struggled to describe what they were witnessing. The human was rewriting the basic assumptions about endurance capabilities, not through obvious physical advantages but through an uncanny ability to adapt to any condition. His performance suggested that humans possessed a form of biological versatility that specialized species couldn't match. The psychological impact on the galactic endurance community was profound. Altarian teams that had dominated the sport for generations were questioning their training methodologies. Saros coaches were analyzing human physiology data, trying to understand how a generalist species could outperform their specialized athletes. The implications extended far beyond sports, suggesting that human adaptability might represent a significant advantage in colonization efforts and exploration missions. As Marcus approached the final section of the maze, now over 35 hours into the trial, he encountered the ultimate challenge. The last mile required competitors to ascend a vertical climbing section while maintaining the navigation skills necessary to avoid dead ends and trap corridors. The combination of physical exhaustion and mental fatigue had proven insurmountable for all but the most exceptional competitors in previous trials. The human began his ascent without hesitation, his movements fluid and efficient despite the accumulated stress of 35 hours under extreme conditions. His climbing technique showed no signs of the muscle fatigue or coordination problems that typically affected competitors at this stage. Each handhold was precise, each step calculated, as if his body had somehow achieved a perfect balance between effort and conservation. Commander Zephyr found herself holding her breath as she watched the monitor displays. The human was not just completing the trial, he was doing so with a performance that would shatter every existing record. More importantly, he was demonstrating capabilities that would force the entire galaxy to reconsider their understanding of human potential and the advantages of evolutionary adaptability over specialization. The final ascent took Marcus 3 hours to complete, a pace that was considered impossible for any species under the accumulated stress of Zone 4 conditions. As he reached the summit platform that marked the trial's completion, automated systems immediately began recording his vital signs and documenting what would become the most studied performance in galactic endurance sports history. Marcus Chin crossed the finish line at 38 hours and 47 minutes, shattering the previous galaxy record by over 8 hours. More remarkable than the time itself was his condition upon completion. While previous record holders had required immediate medical intervention, the human appeared capable of continuing indefinitely. His heart rate was elevated but stable, his breathing was controlled, and his coordination remained precise. The medical team that rushed to examine him found readings that defied explanation. His lactate levels, which should have been dangerously high after such prolonged exertion, were within normal ranges. His cellular damage markers showed minimal stress indicators. His hydration levels and electrolyte balance remained surprisingly stable despite the extreme environmental conditions he had endured. Dr. Zenith conducted the post-trial examination personally, running every diagnostic test in the galactic medical database. The results consistently showed that Marcus had completed the most demanding endurance trial in known space with less physiological stress than most species experienced during moderate training exercises. His recovery rate was accelerating rather than slowing, suggesting his body was actually becoming more efficient under extreme conditions. Commander Zephyr approached Marcus as he completed the mandatory medical evaluation. Her forearms gestured in the traditional Altarian salute of respect, an honor typically reserved for warriors who had proven themselves in combat. "Human," she said, her translator struggling with the concepts she wanted to express, "your species has capabilities we do not understand. How did you know where the maze walls would move?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "I didn't know," he replied simply. "I just followed the path that felt right. When one route felt wrong, I tried another direction." The answer sent ripples of confusion through the gathered observers. The human had navigated the most complex puzzle in the galaxy based on intuition rather than calculation. His success wasn't the result of superior technology, enhanced physiology, or specialized training. He had simply adapted to each challenge as it presented itself. The second-place finisher, the Zentorian warrior, arrived 14 hours later in a state that required intensive medical support. The contrast between his condition and the human's post-trial alertness sparked immediate demands for investigation into possible human performance enhancement. Those investigations would ultimately prove fruitless, revealing that Marcus had competed using nothing but natural human capabilities. The galactic endurance community faced a fundamental paradigm shift. Species that had spent generations optimizing for specific environmental challenges discovered that generalist adaptation might be superior to specialization. Human physiology, which appeared unremarkable when compared to obvious advantages like dual hearts or enhanced lung capacity, demonstrated a form of biological versatility that proved more valuable than any single adaptation. The implications extended far beyond sports competition. Military strategists recognized that human adaptability could provide significant advantages in unpredictable combat environments. Colonization planners realized that humans might be uniquely suited for establishing settlements on worlds with varying environmental challenges. Scientific expedition leaders began requesting human team members specifically for their demonstrated ability to function effectively under extreme conditions. Marcus himself seemed unaware of the revolution his performance had sparked. When asked about his training regimen, he described a simple routine of running, swimming, and hiking that seemed inadequate compared to the specialized programs other species employed. His nutrition plan consisted of basic foods available on any human colony world. His preparation time for the trial had been minimal compared to competitors who trained for years specifically for this event. The betting syndicates that had initially offered odds of several thousand to one against the human completing the trial found themselves facing the largest payout in galactic gambling history. More significantly, they immediately began recruiting human consultants to help them understand the species' capabilities for future wagering calculations. As news of the humans' victory spread throughout the galaxy, it triggered a massive shift in how species viewed both endurance capabilities and evolutionary advantages. The assumption that specialized adaptations were inherently superior to generalist traits was challenged by empirical evidence that a species evolved for adaptability could outperform specialists in their own optimized environments. Marcus completed his post-trial interviews with the same understated manner he had maintained throughout the competition. When asked if he planned to compete in future trials, he simply said he had enjoyed the experience and would consider participating again if his schedule permitted. His casual attitude toward an accomplishment that had redefined galactic understanding of endurance capabilities perfectly embodied the human trait that had made his victory possible. The trial administrators announced that future competitions would need to be redesigned to account for human capabilities. The course that had challenged the galaxy's finest endurance athletes for generations was now considered inadequate to properly test the limits of human adaptability. Marcus Chen had not just won a competition, he had proven that humanity's greatest strength lay not in any single exceptional trait, but in their unprecedented ability to excel at everything.